Listener, prepare to witness the moment when loyalty shattered and the Imperium began to bleed. With these words, a long historical analysis begins, tracing the origin of the conflict known across imperial records as the Horus Heresy. To understand how the Imperium reached the brink of self-destruction, one must first examine the era known as the Great Crusade. During that time, the Emperor of mankind sought to reunify scattered human populations across the galaxy under a single political and cultural order. The Imperium expanded rapidly, driven by immense fleets and disciplined armies, all coordinated through a centralized command structure that depended entirely on the authority of the Emperor. At the core of this project stood the Primarchs. They were designed as strategic leaders, embodiments of specific strengths intended to command the Legiones Astartes and serve as interpreters of imperial will. Each legion adopted the temperament and vision of its Primarch, resulting in unity of purpose and deep internal diversity. While loyalty to the Emperor remained the formal doctrine, differing interpretations of imperial policy gradually emerged. These differences were not open rebellion. They existed as ideological variation inside a rapidly growing state stretched across unimaginable distances. The rediscovery of the Primarchs scattered across many worlds formed a key stage in the consolidation of imperial power. Each encounter altered the political balance. Many Primarchs became rulers of their home systems while still serving imperial command. This dual role strengthened local power structures while maintaining allegiance to Terra. It also meant that the Primarchs were not simply officers, they were cultural symbols, military leaders, and political actors whose decisions shaped entire sectors of space. The Great Crusade achieved extraordinary military success. Countless human worlds were brought under imperial law. Technology, administration, and military doctrine standardized across vast regions. However, this success concealed structural vulnerabilities. Communications lag created regions where Primarchs effectively governed without direct oversight. Rivalries over honor, achievement, and strategic philosophy grew. Some legions favored rapid conquest, others preferred gradual integration. None of this yet threatened the Imperium, but it established the conditions in which division could later expand.
Central to the early period was the figure of Horus Lupercal. Once rediscovered, he quickly emerged as the most trusted and capable of the Primarchs. His legion demonstrated exceptional cohesion and strategic effectiveness. Horus acted as a unifying force among his brothers and as a direct representative of the Emperor. His influence ensured that competing egos and doctrines remained subordinate to the wider goal of imperial reunification. It was during this time that many later commentators identified the peak of imperial unity. The Emperor himself increasingly withdrew from the front lines of conquest to pursue undisclosed goals on Terra. This left the day-to-day conduct of the Crusade to his generals, especially the Primarchs. While the strategic direction of the Imperium continued unchanged, personal authority shifted gradually away from the Emperor's direct presence and toward his chosen lieutenants. This shift would later prove decisive, as loyalty became linked not only to the throne on Terra, but also to individual leaders whose ambitions and interpretations differed in subtle but meaningful ways. Thus, the stage was set. A galactic empire led by genetically engineered commanders, expanding across hostile space, united by ideology, yet divided by pride and strategic disagreement. The creation of the Primarchs had given the Imperium unparalleled strength. At the same time, it had concentrated immense power into the hands of a small number of individuals whose relationships would determine the fate of humanity. The Great Crusade appeared unstoppable, but beneath the surface, the first quiet pressures of history were already forming. Horus Lupercal occupied a unique position within the structure of the Great Crusade. Among the Primarchs, he was regarded as the most trusted and politically skilled. His legion possessed a reputation for discipline, adaptability, and loyalty to imperial command. As the Crusade expanded, the need for centralized military coordination increased. The Emperor could no longer personally direct every front or intervene in every dispute among the Primarchs. In response to this growing administrative necessity, the title of Warmaster was created. It was intended as a formal recognition of delegated supreme command over the imperial war effort. This selection of Horus as Warmaster represented a decisive shift in the political structure of the Imperium. By elevating a single Primarch above the others in authority, the Emperor introduced a new hierarchy among beings who had previously regarded themselves as equals under their creator. This appointment was not ceremonial. It granted Horus direct control over strategic operations, campaign planning, and the coordination of multiple legions. The Emperor effectively transformed him into the focal point of imperial military power beyond Terra. This decision carried deep symbolic meaning. Many legions had achieved great victories. Several Primarchs possessed formidable intellect, loyalty, or ideological commitment. Yet only Horus received formal recognition as Supreme Commander. Official records emphasize his proven capacity to unite disparate commanders and maintain cohesion across vast regions of war. His charisma, strategic clarity, and ability to interpret imperial doctrine made him appear uniquely suited to leadership. The appointment was publicly framed as a necessary administrative evolution during a period of extreme expansion. However, the elevation of Horus inevitably altered the internal dynamics of the Primarch Brotherhood. Some welcomed his leadership and acknowledged his competence. Others regarded the new hierarchy as an implicit judgment on their own worth. This sentiment did not immediately manifest as open resentment, yet it created subtle divisions. The position of Warmaster required Horus to mediate disputes, allocate glory, and determine priorities. His decisions now carried additional political weight. Every campaign success attributed to another legion still passed through his authority, reinforcing his centrality within the imperial structure. At the same time, the Emperor increasingly withdrew to Terra to pursue undisclosed projects of governance and development. This physical and symbolic absence strengthened the perception that Horus represented the true operational head of the Imperium. Administrators, commanders, and human political leaders now interacted more frequently with the Warmaster than with the sovereign himself. Over time, a dual structure emerged. Terra remained the ideological and legal heart of the Imperium. Horus became its military and practical center of gravity. The appointment also altered the identity of the Luna Wolves Legion. Their leader was not simply a Primarch. He was the supreme general of the entire Crusade. This elevated their prestige and responsibility. It created closer ties between the Legion and Imperial administration,
while simultaneously increasing their exposure to political tension. Success became expected rather than merely admired. The culture of the Legion shifted toward a sense of custodianship over the broader destiny of humanity. For Horus, the burden of command grew heavier. He carried the responsibility of coordinating immense fleets, resolving ideological disputes among his brothers, and interpreting the Emperor's will across immeasurable distances. Imperial records depict him as successful in these tasks for a significant period of time. Unity was preserved, victories continued, yet the psychological pressure of near-absolute command and the constant comparison among the Primarchs formed the backdrop against which later events would unfold. Thus, the appointment of the Warmaster stands as one of the pivotal structural decisions in Imperial history. It stabilized the conduct of the Great Crusade, while simultaneously concentrating power and prestige in a single individual. The Imperium did not fracture at this moment. Instead, it appeared more unified than ever. Beneath this surface stability, however, loyalties now flowed through a narrower channel. The fate of the expanding human empire became increasingly tied to the judgment, strength, and vulnerability of one figure, Horus Lupercal.
The Imperium during the late Great Crusade appeared outwardly unified, yet beneath the surface a complex network of political and ideological tensions had already formed. These tensions were not the product of open rebellion. They emerged from the very scale and diversity of the imperial project. Countless worlds, cultures, and administrations were being drawn into a single structure governed by rigid doctrine and centralized authority. Interpretation of that doctrine varied from region to region, legion to legion, and even from Primarch to Primarch. What looked like strength also concealed deep structural fractures. Central to imperial ideology was the principle of human supremacy, guided by rational governance. The imperial truth sought to replace superstition and local religion with a secular doctrine of unity. In practice, this policy produced instability. Some worlds accepted imperial rule willingly, others resisted, not only on military grounds, but also cultural and spiritual ones. Many legions enforced compliance with uncompromising efficiency. Others attempted gradual assimilation. These differing methods reflected the personalities of their Primarchs and contributed to ideological divergence within the Astartes themselves. The Primarchs were not identical instruments. Each possessed unique strategic thinking, psychological disposition, and political instinct. Some were deeply committed to the Emperor's doctrine of rational order. Others retained strong emotional ties to the societies that had raised them before imperial discovery. This dual identity created a persistent tension. The Primarchs existed both as servants of Terra and as quasi-sovereign rulers of their home domains. Their legions mirrored these loyalties, forming cultures that, while aligned with imperial command, often prioritized the ethos of their Primarch above abstract doctrine. At the administrative level, enormous power accumulated within the imperial bureaucracy. Human officials, rogue traitors, planetary governors, and military commanders all operated within overlapping jurisdictions. Communication lag across interstellar distances made unified governance extremely difficult. In remote regions, Primarchs effectively governed as autonomous rulers, supported by their legions and local political elites. This autonomy did not immediately threaten the Imperium, yet it meant that loyalty was experienced less as an abstract principle and more as a personal bond to individual leaders.
Another key source of tension lay in differing strategic attitudes toward war and state building. Some legions believed in swift conquest, strict discipline, and total elimination of resistance. Others favored negotiation, hybrid governance, and cultural integration. These approaches produced measurable differences in civilian treatment, urban policy, and post-conquest administration. While the emperor maintained ultimate authority, disputes among Primarchs over appropriate strategy intensified. Such debates were rarely neutral. They were linked to pride, honor, and the perception of relative prestige. The creation of the Warmaster position amplified these dynamics. Horus became the focal point through which policy and command now flowed. Primarchs whose philosophies diverged from his direction began to feel either constrained or overshadowed. Meanwhile, human political figures increasingly aligned themselves not only with imperial doctrine, but also with whichever Astartes commander dominated their region. Power networks emerged that were loyal to individuals as much as to the state itself. Religious undercurrents further complicated the situation. Although the imperial truth rejected organized worship, many citizens began to regard the emperor as a divine or semi-divine being. Such belief systems were officially condemned, yet difficult to eradicate. They reflected a broader psychological need for meaning in an age of constant war and expansion. Within some legions, this informal reverence produced unease. Questions arose regarding the nature of authority, the meaning of loyalty, and the ultimate future of the Imperium. These ideological differences did not yet result in open conflict. Instead, they formed an unstable equilibrium. Mutual respect among the Primarchs, the unifying authority of the Emperor, and the operational leadership of Horus preserved outward unity. But the lines of fracture were already present. Loyalty had become multi-layered, distributed across personal allegiance, cultural identity, and state ideology. When external pressures and internal manipulation later intensified, these unresolved tensions would provide the channels through which division could spread with devastating speed. Across the vast territories of the Imperium, the first signs of fracture did not emerge through open revolt, but through subtle distortions of loyalty and perception. During the later Great Crusade, scattered reports began to surface describing unexplained phenomena, ideological deviation, and psychological strain among both human and Astartes forces. These incidents were often dismissed as local anomalies produced by the extreme stresses of interstellar warfare. In reality, they signaled the growing influence of hostile powers that sought to undermine imperial unity at its ideological core. The Imperium officially rejected supernatural explanations, defining all such manifestations as ignorance or superstition. However, the warp remained essential for faster-than-light travel and communication. Prolonged exposure to it carried inherent risks. A small number of scholars and military observers began to suspect that entities within the warp possessed intelligence and intent. These entities appeared capable of influencing thought, emotion, and belief. Their goals were opaque, yet their effect on susceptible individuals was clear. Doubt, ambition, resentment, and spiritual confusion slowly intensified. Certain worlds displayed increased levels of unexplained cult activity. Secretive groups began to worship forces that contradicted the imperial truth. These movements rarely appeared as organized political rebellions. Instead, they emerged as underground belief systems promising hidden knowledge, liberation from authority, or access to forbidden power. In some cases, isolated Astartes or human commanders encountered such doctrines and underestimated their corrosive effect. The mixture of ideological uncertainty, personal ambition, and exposure to warp influence provided fertile ground for gradual corruption. The Primarchs themselves were not immune to psychological pressure. Each bore immense responsibility, not only for military conquest, but also for the governance of entire regions. Their legions mirrored their strengths and weaknesses. Rivalry, pride, and deep emotional bonds shaped their interactions. As the Warmaster assumed greater leadership authority, perceptions of favoritism or marginalization intensified. External forces exploited these sensitivities, amplifying internal doubts and transforming minor grievances into potential fault lines.
Horus, as the focal point of Imperial command, attracted particular attention from those hostile influences. His strategic brilliance and charismatic authority made him both a stabilizing anchor and a potential vulnerability. Any shift in his perception of the Imperium would inevitably cascade through the legions. Observers later concluded that deliberate efforts were made to isolate him emotionally, reinforce his sense of burden, and magnify the idea that he alone truly understood the future of humanity. Such manipulation was gradual and often invisible to those around him. At the same time, political divisions among human administrators widened. Planetary elites who resented imperial taxation or military requisition began to cultivate covert alliances. Some turned toward forbidden ideologies that promised autonomy or personal power. Others simply exploited uncertainty for pragmatic gain. The combination of political ambition and ideological extremism created networks that operated outside official command while still appearing loyal on the surface. These networks later played a key role in enabling open rebellion. Within the legions, small groups of officers and warriors began to interpret imperial doctrine through increasingly distorted lenses. Loyalty remained their stated principle, yet loyalty became associated more with personal allegiance to specific commanders than with the collective fate of the Imperium. This shift marked the first true crack in unity. What had once been a single, coherent military and ideological structure now contained multiple centers of identity and belief. Despite these developments, the Imperium continued to expand. Most citizens and soldiers remained unaware of the deepening threat. Campaigns were won, new worlds were brought under control, the outward image of strength remained intact. Yet beneath this surface, the slow infiltration of warp-born influence and political fragmentation was already preparing the conditions for catastrophe. When decisive events finally occurred, these early whispers of corruption would reveal themselves as the opening phase of a crisis that would reshape the destiny of humanity forever. The moment that historians identify as the decisive turning point of the Horus Heresy began during an otherwise conventional phase of the Great Crusade. Horus Lupercal, acting in his capacity as Warmaster, led operations intended to consolidate imperial control over contested regions. These actions followed familiar military patterns. Hostile forces were confronted, compliance was demanded, strategic objectives were pursued with the disciplined efficiency that had characterized the Luna Wolves and their commander throughout the expansion of the Imperium. Yet during one such campaign, Horus sustained a grave injury that would change the trajectory of human history. The circumstances of the wounding involved sustained ground combat against opponents who displayed both technological sophistication and ideological resistance. During the course of this engagement, Horus was struck down by a weapon of unusual lethality.
Although Astartes' physiology provided resilience far beyond that of ordinary humans, the severity of the wound threatened his life. The injury carried immense symbolic and strategic implications. The Warmaster was not only a commander, he was the axis around which the entire structure of imperial military coordination revolved. News of his condition spread rapidly across the fleets and legions, producing shock and uncertainty. Medical intervention was immediate, but the effectiveness of conventional treatment remained uncertain. The potential death of Horus presented a profound psychological crisis. Many commanders feared the destabilization of the Crusade. Others considered the broader implications for relations among the Primarchs. With the Emperor physically removed from the front lines, Horus had become the living embodiment of imperial authority in the field. His possible loss threatened to fracture the delicate balance that maintained unity. This sense of vulnerability extended far beyond his legion. It permeated the political structures of the Imperium. It was during this vulnerable period that hostile influences intensified their efforts. Advisors and figures operating within uncertain ideological territory gained unprecedented access to the Warmaster. They presented interpretations of imperial policy that emphasized feelings of isolation and betrayal. Horus, already burdened by the weight of command, became increasingly receptive to the idea that he alone bore the true responsibility for the future of humanity. The suggestion that the Emperor had abandoned the Crusade for secretive projects on Terra took on new meaning. Doubt replaced certainty. Ambition merged with resentment. Contemporary analysis indicates that warp-born entities exploited this psychological instability. They encouraged Horus to reinterpret past events through a lens of suspicion. Every slight, every dispute with his brothers, every political challenge from administrators appeared to confirm the narrative that he had been unfairly burdened and insufficiently recognized. What had once been an unshakable bond of loyalty now began to erode at its foundations. His injury had not only endangered his body, it had exposed his mind to subtle but relentless ideological manipulation. The recovery of Horus physically did eventually stabilize, yet the experience left a permanent mark on his perception of the Imperium. He emerged from this crisis with a transformed understanding of power, loyalty, and destiny. Where once he had viewed himself as the executor of the Emperor's will, he now increasingly saw himself as the rightful arbiter of humanity's future. The authority of Terra appeared distant, abstract, and possibly misguided. His personal judgment, supported by those who now surrounded him, became the guiding principle of his actions. This shift did not immediately result in open rebellion. Outward discipline remained, orders continued to flow, campaigns progressed, but the psychological allegiance of the Warmaster had altered direction. Many within his legion sensed the change. Others among the Primarchs felt a growing distance, though few understood its origin. The political structure of the Imperium now contained a fatal contradiction. Its supreme military commander no longer regarded the central authority of Terra as unquestionable. Instead, he had begun to contemplate an alternative trajectory for the human species. Thus, the Wounding of Horus stands as the moment when the trajectory of the Great Crusade bent irreversibly towards civil war. A single battlefield injury set in motion a chain of ideological, spiritual, and political consequences that would dismantle the unity of the Imperium. What followed was no longer merely a dispute among commanders, but the beginning of a conflict that would divide brothers, devastate entire sectors, and define the future of humanity for millennia to come. The transformation of Horus from loyal Warmaster into a figure of opposition did not immediately manifest as overt conflict. Instead, it began through careful cultivation of alliances, ideological persuasion, and the gradual alignment of several Primarchs and their legions toward a new vision of power within the Imperium. Horus possessed immense personal authority and persuasive ability. Many of his brothers admired his leadership and felt genuine loyalty toward him as the architect of the Great Crusade's success. This emotional and political capital now became the foundation for a widening circle of dissent. The arguments that facilitated this shift were framed not as treason, but as correction. Horus and his closest advisors claimed that the Emperor's withdrawal to Terra had weakened the Crusade and betrayed the original mission of human unification. They argued that remote bureaucratic control threatened the autonomy of the legions and marginalized the role of the Primarchs. The establishment of new administrative structures was presented as evidence that unelected civilian authorities intended to replace the Astartes once conquest was complete. Such claims resonated deeply with those who already harbored resentment or insecurity regarding their status. Within certain legions, long-standing rivalries and cultural peculiarities intensified the appeal of alignment with Horus. Some commanders viewed the Warmaster as more understanding of their methods than the increasingly distant Emperor. Others saw an opportunity to elevate their prestige within a new imperial order centered on military command rather than Terran bureaucracy. Horus did not rely solely on persuasion. Covert intimidation, manipulation of information, and exploitation of personal grievances all contributed to the shifting allegiances. The process was systematic and strategic rather than impulsive. The influence of warp-born entities further amplified these developments. Subtle psychological pressure increased paranoia, pride, and distrust among the Primarchs. Misunderstandings hardened into perceived betrayals. Diplomatic exchanges deteriorated. Legions that once fought alongside one another now began to drift apart, forming distinct political alignments. Those who questioned Horus's emerging ideology found themselves isolated or subtly undermined. In this environment of suspicion, neutrality became increasingly difficult to maintain. At the operational level, the first tangible signs of rebellion appeared through deviations from established strategic coordination. Certain legions began to conduct campaigns without informing Terra or their fellow commanders. Supplies were rerouted. Fleets moved into positions that could not easily be explained as simple military necessity. Human administrators who expressed concern were dismissed or replaced. The chain of command remained outwardly functional, yet its underlying loyalties were changing with remarkable speed. Recruitment and internal culture within traitor-aligned legions also began to shift. Ideological indoctrination replaced traditional imperial doctrine. Warriors were encouraged to view themselves as the true guardians of humanity, unappreciated by the state they had built. Rituals, symbols, and altered hierarchies emerged, reinforcing the sense of belonging to a separate destiny. This process eroded the long-standing unity of the Astartes. Where they had once seen themselves as a collective brotherhood under the Emperor, they now increasingly identified as factions within an impending struggle for control of the Imperium. Crucially, rebellion spread unevenly. Some Primarchs remained steadfast in loyalty to Terra. Others hesitated, attempting to preserve neutrality or mediate reconciliation. This fragmentation prevented any decisive early response. Horus exploited the delay, consolidating his coalition while presenting his actions as defensive rather than offensive. By the time the scale of defection became undeniable, traitor legions already controlled major fleets, key supply lines, and vast regions of space. The spread of rebellion among the Astartes marked the irreversible point of descent into civil war. The Imperium had always relied on the unity and discipline of its genetically engineered warriors. Once that unity collapsed, the entire structure of the state began to fracture. Brothers who had conquered worlds together now prepared to wage war upon one another. The seeds of catastrophe had fully germinated, and the galaxy moved steadily toward a conflict that would reshape human civilization at every level.
As the influence of Horus expanded, the internal cohesion of the Legiones Astartes entered a period of critical instability. What had once been a unified military elite, bound together by shared purpose and obedience to the Emperor, now fractured into competing spheres of loyalty. The chain of command that had directed the Great Crusade depended on trust at every level. Once that trust eroded, the entire system of imperial governance began to deteriorate. The breakdown did not occur in a single dramatic moment. It unfolded gradually through a series of decisions, doubts, and divided allegiances that accumulated until unity could no longer be restored. Within each legion, individual warriors confronted a dilemma that struck at the heart of their identity. Their loyalty had always been trained and conditioned toward their Primarch above all else. At the same time, they had sworn allegiance to the Imperium and to the Emperor as its supreme authority. When certain Primarchs began to align with Horus, their warriors faced a conflict between personal devotion and abstract imperial duty. Many chose their gene-sire without hesitation. Others experienced deep internal conflict, torn between emotional loyalty and ideological conviction. This fragmentation weakened discipline and created internal surveillance, suspicion, and factional tension within the ranks. The Primarchs themselves were no longer united by fraternal respect. Communications that once carried operational updates now contained accusations, warnings, or silence. Diplomatic relations collapsed as mistrust deepened. Some loyalist Primarchs attempted to reason with their brothers, only to find previous bonds replaced by hardened ideological opposition. Others prepared their legions for the possibility of war against former allies. The sense of shared destiny that had defined the Great Crusade gave way to an atmosphere of impending internal conflict. On many vessels and planetary garrisons, the crisis manifested as open schism. Officers declared allegiance either to Terra or to Horus. In some cases, entire companies defected. In others, the division occurred at the level of squads or even individual warriors. Mutinies emerged not as chaotic riots, but as calculated seizures of command structures, communications arrays, and armories. Astartes fought and executed one another inside their own warships, transforming once unified formations into fractured, hostile forces occupying the same corridors and training grounds. Human administrators reacted with alarm. Imperial governors, fleet officers, and bureaucrats relied on the Astartes to enforce order and secure territories. When those same forces began to turn against each other, entire sectors entered political paralysis. Many governors attempted to declare neutrality, hoping to survive regardless of which faction prevailed. Others aligned themselves with Horus, believing that his authority as Warmaster remained legitimate. Still others clung firmly to Terra, only to find themselves isolated and vulnerable to retaliation from nearby traitor forces. The imperial military outside the Astartes also fragmented. Elements of the army and navy followed the legions to which they were attached, splitting fleets and ground forces along lines of personal loyalty rather than state allegiance. Chain of command disintegrated as officers received contradictory orders from rival authorities claiming legitimacy. Strategic coordination became nearly impossible. Instead of a single war effort, there now existed multiple parallel military structures, each regarding the others as potential enemies. Psychological effects spread rapidly. The myth of Astartes' unity had been foundational to imperial identity. Citizens across the Imperium had viewed them as incorruptible guardians of order. Reports of fratricidal conflict shattered that perception. Fear and uncertainty replaced confidence. Civil unrest rose in many regions as populations realized that central authority could no longer guarantee stability. This, in turn, created opportunities for extremist ideologies, local warlords, and hidden cult networks to expand their influence. Within the legions that followed Horus, loyalty hardened into ideological conviction. They began to view Terra not as the heart of the Imperium, but an obstacle to what they believed was the rightful destiny of the Primarchs as true leaders of humanity. Meanwhile, loyalist legions increasingly interpreted their struggle as a moral defense of order against betrayal. These opposing worldviews eliminated any remaining space for reconciliation. Conflict had become inevitable. The breakdown of loyalty and unity marked the final collapse of the structures that had sustained the Great Crusade. Authority no longer flowed from a single source. The Imperium ceased to function as a coherent state and instead became a battlefield of competing claims to legitimacy. What followed would not be a limited dispute or isolated uprising. It would be total civil war on a scale that no previous human conflict had ever approached. Once loyalty fractured beyond repair, the crisis transformed from internal tension into open warfare. The scale of the conflict rapidly surpassed anything previously recorded in human history. Entire fleets defected. Planetary governments declared new allegiances. Communications networks filled with contradictory proclamations, counter-orders, and urgent pleas for support. What had once been the unified Great Crusade dissolved into rival coalitions contesting dominance across the galaxy. The escalation was swift, relentless, and impossible to contain. The first major engagements began when traitor-aligned legions launched coordinated operations against key loyalist assets. These attacks were not random acts of defiance. They followed deliberate strategic objectives. Shipyards, communications hubs, recruitment worlds, and supply depots became primary targets. By crippling logistical infrastructure, the traitor coalition sought to prevent Terra and its allies from organizing an effective response. Many of these assaults occurred without formal declaration of war. Loyalist commanders often discovered the reality of betrayal only when their supposed allies opened fire. At the same time, Horus established parallel chains of authority across the regions under his influence. Planetary governors who pledged allegiance were confirmed in their positions, while those who resisted were removed or eliminated. New political structures emerged that presented the rebellion as a legitimate alternative government rather than a temporary mutiny.
This dual system of governance created immense confusion for administrators and civilians who now faced competing demands for loyalty, backed by overwhelming military power. The Loyalist legions struggled to adapt. Some were isolated deep in contested territory with limited access to friendly fleets. Others were still engaged in external campaigns and initially refused to believe the scale of the rebellion. As evidence accumulated, they reoriented their strategies from expansion to defense. The Great Crusade effectively ended. The Imperium turned inward, devoting its full strength not to unifying humanity, but to preventing its own disintegration. As the conflict intensified, civilian populations suffered catastrophic consequences. Entire worlds became battlefields. Urban centers were destroyed by orbital bombardment. Agricultural regions were burned to deny resources to the enemy. Trade collapsed. Local economies disintegrated. The promise of order that the Imperium had once offered now appeared shattered, replaced by uncertainty and devastation. The psychological impact across imperial space was profound. Citizens had long regarded the Astartes as guardians of stability. Now these same warriors were seen leading fleets that burned cities and eradicated populations suspected of disloyalty. Propaganda from both sides attempted to justify such actions as necessary for survival or ideological purity. Trust in central authority declined dramatically. In this environment, extremist belief systems grew, including those influenced by warp entities seeking to exploit the chaos. Naval warfare reached unprecedented levels of complexity and brutality. Massive fleet engagements decided the fate of entire sectors. Control of warp routes became essential. Strategic choke points were fortified, ambushed, or saturated with mines. Boarding actions, sabotage operations, and assassination campaigns multiplied. Astartes warriors who once fought side by side now confronted one another in brutal, close-quarters combat aboard burning starships. The destruction of even a single capital vessel could doom entire planetary systems dependent on its protection. Ground warfare was equally devastating. Traitor and Loyalist legions deployed across countless worlds, bringing with them armored formations, artillery, and orbital support. Cities that had been symbols of imperial progress were reduced to ruins. Civilian militias rose in support of one faction or the other, often without full understanding of the larger conflict. Local leaders attempted to negotiate neutrality, but neutrality rarely survived once strategic value became apparent to either side. As the war escalated, coordination among Loyalist forces improved slowly but steadily. Primarchs still loyal to Terra began to share intelligence, consolidate fleets, and attempt to secure vital corridors of communication. Their objective was not conquest, but survival. They recognized that the rebellion threatened the very existence of the Imperium as a unified civilization. Yet they faced enormous disadvantages. Horus already controlled significant territory, industrial capacity, and many of the most experienced commanders in the galaxy. The escalation of war across imperial space marked the irreversible transition from political crisis to existential conflict. The Imperium no longer fought external enemies, it fought itself, expending its greatest strength against its own heart. Every battle inflicted losses that could never be replaced. Every victory came at the cost of long-term stability. The galaxy had entered a period of devastation from which no simple restoration of unity would ever be possible. As the Civil War intensified, The fate of the Imperium increasingly hinged on control of strategically vital worlds. These planets served as industrial centers, recruitment hubs, and logistical anchors for entire sectors. Their shipyards produced fleets, their forges supplied armaments, their administrative complexes coordinated governance across countless systems. When traitor forces began to target these locations with deliberate precision, the structural foundations of the Imperium came under direct assault. The fall of key worlds marked the transition from generalized conflict to systemic collapse. Some planets capitulated swiftly through political realignment rather than military defeat. Governors who perceived the momentum of Horus's rebellion declared allegiance in exchange for the promise of continued authority. In many cases, such decisions were motivated less by ideology than by immediate survival. These territories provided the traitor legions with intact infrastructure and stable resource flows. Others resisted, leading to prolonged sieges in which orbital bombardment and ground warfare devastated urban environments and annihilated civilian populations. Industrial strongholds became primary objectives. Forge worlds and shipbuilding centers represented irreplaceable assets. Traitor fleets unleashed concentrated assaults to capture or cripple these facilities before Loyalist relief could arrive. Vast manufactoria were either seized for the rebellion or destroyed to prevent their use by Terra. The result was catastrophic reduction in production capacity. Weapons, armor, vehicles, and starships that had once flowed steadily to Imperial forces now became scarce. Loyalist commanders were forced to ration supplies and retrofit damaged equipment rather than replace it. Recruitment worlds and Astartes' home domains also became sites of intense conflict. These planets symbolized the identity and heritage of individual legions. When traitor forces attacked them, the battles carried both strategic and psychological significance. Populations loyal to Terra were exterminated or forcibly converted to the ideology of rebellion. In response, Loyalist legions enacted harsh reprisals against territories suspected of supporting the traitors. Entire societies were caught between two competing visions of imperial destiny, each enforced by armies possessing overwhelming destructive power. Communication hubs and astropathic relay worlds were likewise critical. By capturing or corrupting these nodes, Horus disrupted the flow of intelligence across Loyalist space. Orders arrived late or not at all. Fleets moved in isolation, unaware of the wider strategic picture. Some worlds fought to the last defense line, unaware that nearby sectors had already fallen. Others surrendered prematurely, believing themselves abandoned, when in reality relief forces were already en route. The fog of war deepened, enabling the traitor coalition to exploit miscommunication on a massive scale. The psychological toll of these losses reverberated across the Imperium. Each captured world represented not only a strategic defeat, but also a symbolic erosion of the unity that had once defined humanity's expansion. Citizens witnessed the destruction of iconic cities, monuments, and institutions that had embodied imperial progress. Many began to doubt whether the Imperium could ever be restored. This despair further weakened resistance and encouraged local leaders to seek accommodation with whichever faction appeared dominant at the moment. For the Loyalist Primarchs, the defense of these key worlds became a desperate campaign conducted under severe disadvantage. They were compelled to divide their forces across vast distances, attempting to protect multiple fronts simultaneously. Every reinforcement dispatched to one threatened sector left another exposed. Meanwhile, traitor forces could concentrate their strength at decisive points, delivering overwhelming firepower against isolated defenders. This imbalance of initiative allowed Horus to shape the trajectory of the war according to his broader strategic plan. In some cases, loyalist counteroffensives succeeded in retaking lost territories. Yet such victories came at immense cost. Industrial regions were left in ruins, populations were decimated, ecological systems collapsed under the strain of sustained bombardment and toxic fallout. Even when planets remained nominally under Imperial control, their ability to contribute to the wider war effort had been irreparably damaged. The Imperium's infrastructure, painstakingly built over decades of conquest, was being consumed by the very warriors who had once defended it. As more key worlds fell, the strategic map of the galaxy shifted decisively in favor of the rebellion. Horus now possessed the industrial base, fleet strength, and logistical support necessary to challenge Terra directly. The Loyalists, though still formidable, were increasingly on the defensive. Their objective was no longer the preservation of empire-wide dominance, but the survival of the Imperial core. The war had reached a stage where catastrophic losses were not simply probable, but inevitable, regardless of which side ultimately prevailed. The fall of key worlds thus represented the progressive dismantling of the Imperium's structural foundations. What had been envisioned as an eternal and unassailable order revealed itself to be fragile when turned against itself. Every victory for the Traitors deepened the vulnerability of Terra. Every setback for the Loyalists narrowed the margin for survival. The Civil War had moved beyond ideological dispute or personal rivalry. It had become a struggle that threatened the continued existence of centralized human civilization across the stars.
The Civil War reached its inevitable climax when Horus directed the full weight of the traitor coalition toward Terra itself. The Imperial Palace on Terra symbolized not only political authority, but also the ideological heart of the Imperium. As long as Terra remained unbroken, the legitimacy of loyalist resistance could not be extinguished. Horus therefore determined that a decisive assault on the cradle of imperial power would force the end of the conflict. The Siege of Terra became the central event of the heresy, concentrating military, spiritual, and symbolic dimensions of the war into a single, prolonged confrontation. The build-up to the siege involved massive strategic preparation. Traitor fleets secured critical warp routes, neutralized loyalist strongholds, and isolated Terra from much of the remaining imperial infrastructure. Meanwhile, the Emperor ordered the recall of loyalist legions, though many remained scattered or engaged in delaying actions far from the Sol system. As Horus advanced, the defenders transformed Terra into a fortress. Defensive rings were established across the system. Orbital platforms, minefields, and naval formations formed layered barriers intended to delay the inevitable assault. When the traitor armada arrived, the scale of the conflict surpassed anything previously experienced. Vast battle fleets clashed throughout the system. Loyalist ships engaged in desperate holding actions to protect the planet, while evacuation efforts sought to move vulnerable populations into hardened shelters. Despite courageous resistance, the sheer mass of the traitor offensive gradually overwhelmed orbital defenses. Once Horus secured dominance in space, the focus of the conflict shifted to the surface of Terra. The Imperial Palace, an immense complex of fortifications, became the final redoubt. The defense of Terra united a diverse array of forces.
Loyalist Astartes, Imperial Army divisions, Custodian Guard units, and civilian militias all played roles in the defense. The Primarchs, still aligned with Terra, coordinated strategies to hold key sectors, slow the traitor advance, and protect the Emperor's inner sanctum. Fighting occurred across ruined districts, shattered monuments, and once thriving population centers. Cities that had stood for millennia were reduced to rubble under sustained bombardment. Civilian suffering reached extreme levels, though record-keeping during the siege remains incomplete. Traitor legions launched relentless offensives against the defenses of the palace. Titans, armored columns, and mass infantry formations advanced through devastated terrain under constant fire. Each breach in the fortifications triggered brutal close-quarters combat as defenders fought to seal the gap. The siege became a prolonged struggle of attrition in which both sides sustained immense casualties. Despite their numerical and logistical advantages, the traitors confronted defenders motivated by a profound sense of existential duty. Terra could not be abandoned. Its fall would represent the final death of imperial unity.
The strategic objective of Horus was to draw the Emperor into decisive engagement. By concentrating the war upon Terra, he aimed to compel a confrontation that would settle the fate of the Imperium in a single climactic struggle. Loyalist commanders recognized this intention, but had little choice. Withdrawal was impossible. Negotiation was unthinkable. The siege therefore evolved into a test not only of military strength, but of ideological endurance. Each faction claimed to embody the true destiny of humanity. Victory would determine which interpretation became the foundation of future history. As the battle continued, loyalist reinforcements attempted to reach Terra, but warp storms, traitor blockades, and fragmented communications severely limited their success. Those forces that did arrive often entered the system under immediate fire, committing themselves to the surface struggle with minimal preparation. Meanwhile, Horus coordinated multi-directional assaults designed to exhaust the defenders and force continual redeployment. The intensity of combat placed enormous strain on command structures. Yet, despite repeated breakthroughs, the defenders repeatedly stabilized their lines at immense cost. The Siege of Terra marked the culmination of all preceding developments in the heresy. The ideological divisions, the collapse of loyalty, the fall of key worlds, and the transformation of Horus from loyal Warmaster into arch-rebel all converged upon this single conflict. The outcome would determine whether the Imperium survived as a centralized civilization or fractured permanently into warring successor states under traitor dominion. Every soldier, every ship, and every commander engaged in the siege understood its significance. In the final phase of the siege, the front lines closed ever nearer to the inner sanctums of the palace. Walls that had been regarded as impenetrable were shattered by concentrated bombardment. The defenders withdrew layer by layer toward the heart of imperial authority. Yet, as the situation grew increasingly desperate, Terra did not fall. The Emperor remained at the center of events, directing the defense and preparing for the decisive intervention that would determine the fate of humanity. The Siege of Terra thus stands as the defining military episode of the Horus Heresy. It represented the moment when the Imperium confronted the full consequences of its internal fragmentation. The greatest warriors of humanity fought not for conquest, but for survival against former brothers. The destruction inflicted upon Terra would leave permanent scars, both physical and cultural, that shaped the character of the Imperium for all subsequent ages. The Siege of Terra and the wider conflict of the Horus Heresy demonstrated the full extent of the Imperium's military apparatus. Never before had the full range of its strategic assets been turned inward against itself. Titans, starship fleets, armored divisions, and mass infantry formations all took part in campaigns where both sides possessed equivalent technology, doctrine, and experience. The result was a form of warfare that achieved unprecedented levels of intensity and destruction. Every engagement became a demonstration of total war, in which no distinction existed between frontline operations and the survival of civilization itself. Central to this machinery of war were the Titans. These towering engines of destruction embodied the fusion of advanced technology, religious ritual, and military doctrine that characterized the Imperium. Each Titan represented a mobile fortress equipped with devastating weaponry capable of reshaping entire battlefields. During the Heresy, Titans fought Titans across shattered cities and ruined plains. Their duels left craters where districts had once stood, erasing infrastructure that had taken centuries to build. Once these god machines had symbolized imperial unity, now their banners marked the division of former allies into mortal enemies. Naval warfare formed the other decisive pillar of the conflict. The fleets of the Imperium were vast, organized into layers of capital ships, escorts, and logistical vessels. During the Heresy, many of these fleets split along ideological lines. Admirals, captains, and crews declared loyalty either to Horus or to Terra. The result was a series of massive engagements fought across strategic warp routes and planetary orbits. Boarding actions involving Astartes boarding parties became common, turning the interiors of kilometer-long warships into lethal battlegrounds where control of a single deck could determine the outcome of an entire campaign. The logistical dimension of fleet combat played a decisive role. Warships required continuous resupply of fuel, ammunition, and personnel. Traitor forces targeted depots, fuel refineries, and transport convoys to slowly degrade Loyalist capacity. In turn, Loyalist commanders concentrated their remaining resources to defend critical supply chains feeding Terra and the few remaining strongholds under Imperial control. The destruction of a single convoy could disrupt entire sectors. The war therefore extended beyond the front lines into every part of the galactic infrastructure that supported military operations. Armored warfare on planetary surfaces reached comparable levels of sophistication and brutality. Legions deployed heavy tanks, artillery, and mechanized infantry in combined arms operations coordinated with orbital fire support. Civilian terrain offered little protection. Cities became strongpoints. Highway systems turned into kill zones. Every industrial facility and transport hub represented a potential objective. The massive scale of Astartes engagements meant that individual battles could determine the fate of millions within days. Casualty figures, already immense, rose to levels that overwhelmed any remaining administrative capacity to record them accurately.
The participation of the Titan legions and the Mechanicum introduced additional layers of complexity. Different forge worlds aligned with either the Emperor or Horus, bringing with them not only Titans, but also advanced weaponry, armor production, and technical expertise. Their defection or loyalty shaped the balance of power across entire campaigns. In many regions, the outcome of battles depended less on numerical strength than on which side retained access to functioning manufactoria and maintenance crews capable of sustaining high-technology war machines under continuous combat conditions. Psychologically, the deployment of such overwhelming military assets had profound consequences. Civilians witnessed walking engines of war stride through the ruins of their homes. Fleets capable of sterilizing planets fought duels above worlds already devastated by ground combat. The sense that the Imperium existed to protect humanity gave way to the realization that humanity had become collateral to its own internal conflict. This recognition deepened despair, eroded social cohesion, and drove populations either into passive submission or toward radicalization under whichever faction controlled their region. The Astartes themselves also experienced the burden of total war. Trained from creation to function as instruments of imperial will, they now confronted the reality of fighting brothers who shared their genetic heritage, training, and strategic doctrine. Every engagement required them to apply maximum lethality against forces that mirrored their own capabilities. Over time, this eroded any lingering expectation of reconciliation. The war became a conflict of annihilation in which only one vision of the future Imperium could survive. Strategically, the machinery of total war favored the Traitor coalition during the early and middle phases of the conflict. Horus had seized significant industrial capacity and secured alliances with powerful Titan and Mechanicum factions. Loyalist forces, although highly motivated, often fought with reduced logistical support and diminishing reserves. However, the concentration of Traitor forces around Terra also created vulnerabilities. Should the siege fail, their fleets and war engines risked destruction far from secure bases. Thus, even as the machinery of total war devastated the heart of the Imperium, the outcome remained uncertain. The heresy, therefore, stands as the ultimate demonstration of the destructive potential inherent within the Imperium's military structure. Its fleets and titans had been designed to unify humanity through conquest and protection. Once redirected inward, they revealed that the Imperium possessed the capacity not only to rule the galaxy, but also to ruin it. The machinery of total war, unleashed without restraint, ensured that even victory would come at a cost from which the Imperium would never fully recover. The defining tragedy of the Horus Heresy was not only the destruction of worlds or the collapse of imperial infrastructure, but the irreversible breakdown of the Brotherhood that had once united the Legiones Astartes. Created as the Emperor's ultimate instrument of unity, the Astartes were bound to one another through shared gene seed, training, and purpose. Their collective identity represented the strongest foundation of imperial military power. When rebellion transformed this bond into enmity, the moral and psychological core of the Imperium was shattered beyond repair. Before the heresy, Astartes warfare had been directed outward against external threats. Rivalries existed, but they remained contained within ritualized honor traditions. The Primarchs fostered competitive pride, yet the underlying assumption of loyalty to Terra held firm. Once Horus declared open rebellion and significant numbers of Primarchs aligned with him, these rivalries hardened into ideological divides. Brotherhood, once unquestioned, became contested. The Astartes now viewed one another not as comrades in arms, but as obstacles to competing visions of humanity's destiny. This collapse manifested most starkly in direct Astartes against Astartes combat. Legions that had once fought side by side now met as mortal enemies on fleets, fortress worlds, and the surface of Terra itself. Because their tactics, equipment, and psychology were nearly identical, such engagements became intensely brutal. Neither side underestimated the other. Every warrior understood the strengths and weaknesses of his opponent because they were reflections of his own. The result was warfare in which mercy became almost impossible, replaced by the cold calculation of annihilation. The emotional cost of this fratricide was immense. Many Astartes retained vivid memories of campaigns fought alongside those they were now sworn to kill. Bonds formed over decades of shared hardship and victory were pitted against ideological commitment to Primarch or Emperor. Some warriors experienced profound internal conflict. Others embraced their new identity with uncompromising conviction, rejecting the past in order to function within the reality of total war. In either case, the shared culture of the Astartes fractured. What had been a unified martial tradition now splintered into hostile legacies. The Primarchs themselves bore the greatest symbolic weight. They were not merely commanders, they were paternal figures whose gene seed defined their legions. When they turned upon one another, they transformed the nature of loyalty within their forces. Warriors did not simply fight for an abstract state. They fought for the living embodiment of their heritage. This gave the conflict extraordinary intensity, but it also ensured that reconciliation would be nearly impossible. A betrayal enacted at the level of genetic and emotional identity could not easily be undone.
Internal purges further deepened the divide. Within both Loyalist and Traitor legions, those suspected of divided loyalty were removed, isolated, or eliminated. These actions reinforced ideological cohesion, but at the cost of trust. Entire companies fractured when officers chose different allegiances. Veteran warriors who had once served as stabilizing figures were executed or defected. Training cadres, command structures, and traditions of honor were rewritten or erased according to new ideological boundaries. The legions did not simply wage war, they redefined themselves through conflict. Human observers within the Imperium watched this collapse with a mixture of fear and disbelief. The Astartes had been regarded as the guardians of order and the living embodiment of imperial unity. Their transformation into agents of civil war fundamentally damaged confidence in imperial authority. Many citizens no longer perceived the Imperium as a stable protector, but as a system vulnerable to its own internal contradictions. This psychological break would influence imperial culture long after the war ended, creating an atmosphere of suspicion and rigid control. The collapse of brotherhood among the Astartes also reshaped strategic doctrine. Where once legions had coordinated seamlessly, now they engaged in complex counter-operations based on intimate knowledge of one another's methods. Defensive plans accounted for predictable assault patterns of specific traitor legions. Likewise, traitor commanders designed strategies to exploit the tendencies of their loyalist counterparts. The heresy therefore became not only a civil war, but a technical contest between mirror images, accelerating the devastation as each side anticipated and countered the other with lethal precision. Ultimately, the most enduring consequence of this collapse was the permanent fragmentation of the Astartes system itself. The trust that had once allowed vast armies of genetically enhanced warriors to operate under a unified command structure could never be restored. Even before the war concluded, the realization spread through loyalist leadership that such concentrated power posed an existential risk if unity broke again. The reforms that followed would dismantle the old legion structure completely, replacing it with smaller, more controllable formations. Thus, the collapse of brotherhood among the Astartes marked the moral center of the Horus Heresy. It revealed the vulnerability of even the most disciplined forces when exposed to ideological manipulation, personal loyalty, and the corrosive influence of power.
The heresy did not merely change political boundaries or military doctrine, it destroyed the shared identity of the Emperor's greatest warriors, ensuring that the Imperium, even in victory, would never again know the unity it once possessed.
The Siege of Terra reached its defining moment when the long-anticipated confrontation between the Emperor and Horus finally took place. Throughout the war, Horus had systematically reshaped the strategic environment with the objective of forcing such a meeting. He recognized that the Emperor represented not only the supreme authority of the Imperium, but also the symbolic anchor of loyalty for countless soldiers and citizens. If the Emperor could be defeated, physically and ideologically, the entire foundation of imperial unity would collapse. The decisive battle was therefore not merely tactical, it was the culmination of every political, military, and ideological development that had unfolded since the beginning of the heresy. In order to compel this confrontation, Horus took the unprecedented step of lowering the void shields of his flagship. This decision exposed the vessel to direct assault, but also signaled an invitation to the Emperor and his closest commanders. The gesture transformed the confrontation was prolonged and devastating. The surrounding environment was shattered as unimaginable energy was unleashed. Loyalist warriors who attempted to intervene found themselves outmatched or prevented from participating. The Emperor sustained grave injuries as Horus pressed the advantage granted by his new sources of strength. For a moment, the outcome appeared to favor the Warmaster, suggesting that the rebellion might achieve total victory and that Terra would fall soon after. Yet the confrontation ultimately reached a turning point. Whether through strategic insight, a final exertion of power, or a momentary weakening of Horus's resolve, the Emperor was able to strike decisively. The blow did not merely defeat the Warmaster in physical combat, it severed the ideological momentum of the rebellion at its source. Horus, who had once symbolized the unity and future of the Imperium, was slain by the very figure who had raised him to that position. In that instant, the rebellion lost its central organizing will. The death of Horus did not end the war immediately, but it shattered the cohesion of the traitor legions. Without their unifying leader, the traitor legions lost strategic direction. Many commanders withdrew from Terra, recognizing that the opportunity for decisive victory had ended. The Siege of Terra began to unravel. Loyalist forces regained the initiative, though they did so amid catastrophic losses and the near ruin of the imperial heartworld. The final confrontation between the Emperor and Horus thus marked both the culmination and the collapse of the Horus Heresy. It resolved the conflict at its symbolic core, while leaving behind an Imperium so badly damaged that its survival remained uncertain. The confrontation revealed the inherent dangers of concentrating absolute power within a small number of extraordinary individuals. It demonstrated that the greatest threat to the Imperium did not arise from external enemies, but from the internal fracture of its own foundations. The price of containing that fracture would shape imperial policy and culture for all subsequent ages. The death of Horus ended the central contest of will that had defined the Horus Heresy, but the cost of that victory was immediate and catastrophic. During the final confrontation aboard the flagship of the Warmaster, the Emperor sustained injuries of such severity that even his unmatched physical and psychic resilience could not fully withstand them. These wounds were not limited to the physical body.
They also reflected the strain of prolonged psychic exertion, the immense burden of command, and the emotional devastation of destroying the son he had once trusted above all others. The result was the near-total collapse of the living embodiment of imperial authority. In the aftermath of Horus's death, loyalist forces secured the emperor and extracted him from the flagship. The battlefield conditions surrounding this evacuation were chaotic. Traitor forces were beginning to withdraw from Terra, while loyalist commanders attempted to restore order and consolidate control. The emperor's condition quickly became the defining concern of imperial leadership. It was immediately clear that conventional medical intervention would be inadequate. His wounds surpassed any known form of biological trauma. Vital systems were failing. Psychic stability wavered. The Imperium faced the possibility of losing its sovereign at the very moment it had narrowly avoided total defeat. The responsibility for preserving what remained of the Emperor's life fell to his closest servants and the Mechanicum loyal to Terra. They undertook the unprecedented task of sustaining him through arcane biomechanical systems and advanced life support technology. This effort culminated in the placement of the Emperor upon the Golden Throne, a vast and complex device originally intended for purposes unrelated to life preservation. Repurposed in desperation, it became both a medical apparatus and a symbol of the new phase of imperial existence. From that moment forward, the Emperor would remain physically incapacitated, yet psychically active, suspended between life and death. The psychological impact of the Emperor's mortal wounding was profound. Throughout the Great Crusade, he had been seen as an unassailable figure whose authority derived from both personal presence and supreme capability. Now that presence was reduced to a distant, silent force, mediated through the Golden Throne and the institutions that formed around it. The Imperium had been constructed under the premise of unity under a single guiding will. With that will no longer able to act directly, a permanent vacuum of authority emerged, to be filled not by an individual, but by an evolving bureaucracy. For the loyalist Primarchs, the Emperor's fate represented a moment of irreversible loss. They had been created to serve him, guided by his strategic vision and moral authority. Now they found themselves facing a future in which those directives would be interpreted through intermediaries and institutions. Their grief, guilt, and responsibility were immense. Some had arrived too late to influence the outcome of the siege. Others had lost entire legions in its defense. The wounding of the Emperor symbolized the end of the era in which personal bonds between sovereign and Primarch had structured the Imperium. The mortal wounding also transformed the ideological identity of the state. Although the imperial truth had emphasized rational authority and rejection of religious belief, the emperor's new condition invited forms of reverence that increasingly resembled worship. Citizens across the galaxy now viewed him as a distant, suffering guardian whose continued existence required sacrifice and obedience. Administrators recognized the political utility of this perception. Over time, loyalty to the Imperium became closely bound to devotion toward the immobile yet omnipresent Emperor on the throne. On a practical level, the Golden Throne became essential to the continued functioning of Imperial warp travel and communication. The Emperor's psychic power stabilized critical networks and protected humanity from hostile warp entities. Thus, his survival was not merely symbolic, it became a technical necessity for the persistence of interstellar civilization. The Imperium existed in a paradoxical state. its supreme ruler was both incapacitated and indispensable, both absent from daily governance and central to the survival of the species. The mortal wounding of the Emperor therefore marked the definitive end of the Great Crusade era. Leadership shifted from a single visionary figure to an intricate and often contested hierarchy of institutions. The Primarchs, once the pillars of imperial unity, now faced a future in which their continued existence represented both strength and potential instability. The state they defended had survived, but only through the transformation of its sovereign into a permanent, suffering presence at the heart of the imperial palace. This outcome encapsulated the essential tragedy of the Horus Heresy. Victory had been achieved, but at a cost that permanently altered the nature of imperial power. The Emperor, who had sought to build a unified and rational civilization, now ruled as a silent and immobile figure of near mythic status. The Imperium would endure, but it would do so in a form profoundly shaped by loss, mourning, and the constant awareness that its survival rested upon the unending sacrifice of its wounded master.
With the death of Horus and the mortal wounding of the Emperor, the strategic direction of the war shifted decisively. The Traitor coalition, once unified by the authority and charisma of the Warmaster, now fragmented under the pressure of defeat. Without Horus as the central organizing will, coordination among the traitor legions rapidly deteriorated. Some commanders sought to continue the assault upon Terra, driven by ideological conviction or personal pride. Others recognized that the balance of power had turned irrevocably in favor of the Loyalists. The result was a chaotic and increasingly desperate withdrawal from the Sol system that marked the beginning of the exile of the traitor forces. The retreat did not unfold as an orderly military evacuation. Traitor fleets disengaged under constant pursuit from Loyalist naval elements, suffering heavy losses as they attempted to escape through contested warp routes. Many warships were destroyed during this phase, either by enemy fire or by catastrophic warp translation under combat conditions. The once formidable armadas that had carried rebellion across the stars were reduced to scattered groups of surviving vessels fleeing toward the outer reaches of the galaxy. Strategic unity gave way to isolated survival. For the traitor Primarchs, the aftermath of Horus's death represented both personal and ideological collapse. Their rebellion had been justified as a challenge to the authority and direction of the Imperium. With the defeat at Terra and the loss of their leader, that justification now existed only as fractured memory and embittered rhetoric. Each Primarch reacted differently. Some embraced the influence of warp entities more completely, interpreting exile as a form of dark transcendence. Others persisted out of sheer defiance, unable or unwilling to acknowledge the irrevocable consequences of their actions. None could return to imperial society. The path of exile was permanent. The surviving traitor legions withdrew into regions of unstable warp activity and remote territory beyond the effective reach of the Imperium. These areas, later known collectively as the Eye of Terror and other warp-saturated zones, provided both sanctuary and corruption. The influence of the warp intensified, reshaping not only ideology, but the very nature of the traitors themselves. Over time, their cultures, bodies, and command structures became increasingly distorted. What had begun as a political and ideological rebellion evolved into a permanent separation from the rest of humanity, defined by hatred, memory, and the influence of darker powers. Meanwhile, the Loyalist forces on Terra faced the challenge of stabilizing a shattered empire while managing the remnants of the conflict. Pursuit of the fleeing traitor legions was limited by exhausted resources, devastated infrastructure, and the need to secure critical systems that had been left vulnerable during the siege.
Many commanders viewed the exile of the traitors as both a relief and a warning. The immediate threat to Terra had passed, but the ideological and military forces that had nearly destroyed the Imperium still existed beyond its borders, awaiting future opportunities to strike.
The political consequences of the retreat were significant. With Horus gone and the traitor legions in exile, the rebellion ceased to function as a unified alternative to imperial authority. Instead, it fragmented into separate domains ruled by exiled Primarchs and warlords. This prevented any immediate resurgence of large-scale civil war, but ensured the persistence of a long-term existential threat. The Imperium now confronted an enemy that understood its structures, psychology, and weaknesses, and that retained the ideological motivation to exploit them indefinitely. For the citizens of the Imperium, the retreat of the traitor legions did not bring immediate peace. Many worlds remained in ruins. Populations were displaced or traumatized. Entire sectors required reconstruction under conditions of resource scarcity and political uncertainty. Nevertheless, the withdrawal of traitor forces allowed the slow re-establishment of administrative control. Loyalist commanders began to rebuild fleet strength, restore communication networks, and reassert order across fractured regions. This process marked the first stage of recovery, though it occurred under the shadow of continued threat from beyond imperial space. The exile of the traitor legions also reshaped the moral narrative of the Imperium. The rebels were no longer seen as misguided brothers or political rivals. They became eternal enemies, defined not by disagreement, but by betrayal. This perception justified increasingly rigid systems of control, surveillance, and ideological enforcement within imperial society. The lesson drawn from the heresy was clear. Internal dissent carried the potential to destroy civilization itself. Future imperial policy would be built upon the determination to prevent such dissent from ever again reaching similar proportions. Thus, the retreat and exile of the traitor legions represented both an end and a beginning. It marked the conclusion of open civil war and the survival of the Imperium in a recognizable form. At the same time, it created a permanent division within the Astartes tradition and established the foundation for an era of unending hostility between the Imperium and its former champions. The heresy had ended as a war of rebellion. It continued as an enduring schism that would define the strategic and psychological landscape of humanity for millennia to come. In the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, the Imperium confronted the urgent necessity of reorganizing itself in order to survive. The existing structures of governance and military command had proven vulnerable to internal fracture. A single rebellion led by the Warmaster had nearly destroyed the entire civilization. With the Emperor confined to the Golden Throne and incapable of direct rule, the Imperium entered a new political era defined by institutional authority rather than personal leadership. The restructuring process sought to prevent any future concentration of power that might enable another civil war of comparable scale. Central to this transformation was the establishment of the High Lords of Terra. This council emerged as the supreme governing authority of the Imperium, composed of key institutional leaders, such as representatives of the Administratum, the Adeptus Mechanicus loyal to Terra, the Ecclesiarchy as it gradually developed, and the Imperial military. They acted collectively in the Emperor's name, issuing decrees and determining policy across the galaxy. This arrangement ensured continuity of governance,
but also marked a decisive shift from charismatic leadership to bureaucratic rule. Power now rested in complex systems rather than in a single figure. Equally significant were the reforms imposed upon the Astartes. The collapse of Legion unity during the Heresy demonstrated the existential danger of allowing individual Primarchs to command vast, semi-autonomous armies. In response, the surviving loyalist leadership oversaw the division of the Legiones Astartes into smaller, independent formations known as chapters. Each chapter operated as a distinct military force with limited numbers and codified structure. This reform aimed to disperse power so that no single commander could again mobilize forces on the scale that Horus had once commanded. These structural changes were codified through newly formalized doctrines that emphasized discipline, separation of authority, and rigid organizational hierarchy. The Astartes remained elite shock troops, but their political influence was now sharply restricted. Their independence was carefully balanced against oversight from imperial institutions. Meanwhile, the imperial army, later reorganized into the Astra Militarum, expanded its role as the primary conventional fighting force. Naval command structures underwent similar reforms to prevent unilateral control of large fleets by any single figure. The restructuring extended beyond military organization into ideological life. The trauma of the heresy accelerated the development of a state cult centered around the figure of the emperor. While earlier imperial doctrine had rejected religious interpretation, the post-heresy Imperium increasingly embraced the emperor as a sacred and eternal guardian. This provided a powerful unifying ideology capable of binding diverse populations under a single moral and political framework. It also reinforced the legitimacy of the High Lords, who ruled in the name of a revered, semi-divine sovereign.
Administratively, the Imperium became more centralized in theory, while remaining decentralized in practice due to the vast distances involved. Planetary governors retained significant autonomy, but operated under stricter regulation and surveillance. Institutions such as the Inquisition emerged with sweeping authority to investigate and eliminate threats of heresy, rebellion, or warp corruption. These developments reflected the lesson that internal ideological deviation posed as great a danger as external enemies. Security, stability, and doctrinal purity became guiding principles. The Mechanicus, whose own ranks had been divided during the war, also underwent internal consolidation. Forge Worlds reaffirmed loyalty to Terra while maintaining their distinct traditions and semi-independent governance. The balance between religious reverence for technology and allegiance to imperial authority became a defining feature of the post-heresy order. Cooperation between Mechanicus and Imperium was essential for reconstruction and for maintaining the technological infrastructure that sustained interstellar civilization. For the surviving Primarchs, the restructuring represented both vindication and limitation. Their loyalty had preserved the Imperium, yet their authority was now constrained by institutional oversight and rigid codification. Some accepted these changes as necessary safeguards. Others struggled with the loss of autonomy and the transformation of the Imperium from a visionary project into a defensive, bureaucratic state focused primarily on survival. Over time, many of the remaining Primarchs withdrew from direct governance, leaving institutions to shape the future in their absence.
The restructuring of the Imperium therefore marked the transition from an expansionist civilization to a fortress empire. The optimism of the Great Crusade was replaced by vigilance and suspicion. The state that emerged from the heresy was more rigid, more controlled, and less tolerant of deviation. It retained immense military and administrative capacity, but its primary objective was no longer to reshape the galaxy. Its purpose became the preservation of what remained, guarded by institutions built upon the memory of betrayal and the constant fear of its return. This new order ensured the survival of humanity, but locked it into a permanent condition of defensive endurance. The Imperium had learned the cost of internal freedom and had chosen security instead. The legacy of the restructuring would define every aspect of imperial life for millennia, shaping not only governance and warfare, but the very psychology of its people. The Horus Heresy had broken the old Imperium. What replaced it was harder, more controlled, and forever marked by the shadow of civil war. The conclusion of the Horus Heresy did not simply reshape the political and military structures of the Imperium. It also transformed the spiritual and cultural foundations of human civilization on a vast scale. Before the war, the Imperium had promoted a doctrine based on rational authority, technological progress, and ideological unity under the principle known as the imperial truth. Religion was discouraged or suppressed. The emperor was formally presented not as a god, but as a supreme human leader. The trauma of the heresy shattered this framework. In its place emerged a new cultural reality defined by reverence, fear, and the search for meaning in catastrophe. The emperor's mortal wounding became the central symbol of this transformation. Suspended upon the golden throne, unable to speak or act directly, he nevertheless continued to guide and protect humanity through immense psychic power. To countless citizens, this condition signified not simple infirmity, but sacrificial guardianship. The idea of the emperor as a suffering, eternal protector spread rapidly. Over time, this belief hardened into an organized cult, supported and regulated by emerging institutions that recognized its power to unify populations traumatized by civil war. The growth of this religious culture fundamentally altered imperial identity. Loyalty to the state now merged with spiritual devotion. Citizens did not merely obey administrative authority, they expressed faith in the emperor as divine. Rituals, prayers, and sacred texts developed, interpreting the heresy as a cosmic struggle between loyalty and corruption. Horus and the traitor Primarchs became emblematic figures of betrayal, used to reinforce moral discipline and unquestioning obedience. The legacy of the heresy therefore lived on not only in military strategy, but in the daily spiritual lives of imperial subjects. The Astartes themselves also experienced deep cultural transformation. The collapse of brotherhood during the heresy left permanent psychological scars. Chapters formed from the remnants of the former legions developed distinct traditions centered on memory, penitence, or unyielding vigilance. Some emphasized absolute loyalty to the emperor as a sacred duty. Others defined themselves through relentless hatred of the traitor forces that had once been their brothers. Each chapter constructed its identity around the lessons and wounds of the Civil War, ensuring that the memory of the heresy remained embedded in their culture. Among ordinary citizens, the cultural atmosphere shifted toward suspicion, conformity, and fear of ideological deviation. The heresy had demonstrated that dissent at the highest levels could threaten the survival of the entire species. As a result, imperial society increasingly valued obedience over inquiry and tradition over change. Surveillance, denunciation, and rigid enforcement of orthodoxy became common features of daily life. Creativity and intellectual independence persisted only within narrow bounds. The Imperium evolved into a civilization defined less by hope for the future than by determination to prevent another catastrophe. The Mechanicus and other technical institutions experienced their own spiritual evolution. Many already held quasi-religious attitudes toward technology. After the heresy, these tendencies intensified. Machines, relics, and ancient knowledge became objects of ritual significance as much as practical tools. This further embedded spirituality into every level of imperial culture, from manufacturing and warfare to governance and communication. The line between religion and administration blurred as ceremonies accompanied even routine functions of the state. Cultural memory of the Horus Heresy itself underwent gradual codification. Official histories emphasized themes of loyalty, sacrifice, and the eternal danger of heresy. Traitor Primarchs were depicted as cautionary examples, illustrating the ruinous consequences of ambition and disobedience. Loyalist heroes were elevated to near mythic status. This narrative structure shaped education, propaganda, and public art across the Imperium. Generations grew up understanding the heresy not as a complex political struggle, but as a moral epic in which virtue and betrayal define the fate of humanity. At the same time, unrecorded or suppressed histories persisted in shadows. Some scholars, soldiers, and witnesses retained more nuanced memories of the events, recognizing the interplay of ideology, personality, and structural weakness that had fueled the war. Yet open discussion of such complexity risked accusations of disloyalty. Official doctrine required clarity and certainty rather than ambiguity. Over centuries, the simplified narrative solidified into cultural orthodoxy, reinforcing the authority of institutions that presided over imperial life. The spiritual and cultural aftermath of the heresy can therefore be understood as a profound shift from a civilization based on reasoned authority to one defined by faith, control, and perpetual vigilance. The Imperium had survived, but it emerged from the trauma transformed into a society that viewed deviation as existential threat and obedience as sacred duty. This new cultural order provided stability, yet it also froze the Imperium into a rigid form that resisted change and innovation. In this environment, the memory of the Horus Heresy served both as warning and justification. It reminded humanity of the fragility of unity and the devastating cost of internal conflict. It also legitimized the increasingly authoritarian structures that dominated imperial life. The war began with ideological doubt among a few privileged commanders. It ended by reshaping the beliefs, values, and identity of trillions. The spiritual and cultural aftermath thus represents one of the most far-reaching legacies of the heresy, extending its influence far beyond the battlefield into the very consciousness of the Imperium itself. The world that emerged from the Horus Heresy no longer resembled the expansionist civilization of the Great Crusade. Instead, a new entity came into existence, shaped by trauma, rigid control, and the permanent absence of direct imperial leadership. This was the modern Imperium, a vast authoritarian state defined by bureaucracy, institutional orthodoxy, and unending vigilance against both internal and external threats. Its birth was not marked by a single decree, but by a gradual consolidation of power, memory, and ideology into a cohesive, self-sustaining system. At the center of this new order stood the immobile figure of the Emperor upon the golden throne. Physically silent, yet psychically present, he became both literally and symbolically the axis around which the Imperium revolved. Governance shifted to a complex network of institutions that claimed to act in his name. The High Lords of Terra coordinated policy. The Administratum managed logistics and taxation across the galaxy. The Imperium's military forces enforced order, and newly formalized religious authorities cultivated devotion to the Emperor as the divine protector of humanity. Authority now flowed downward from an unreachable center through layers of ritualized hierarchy. This new environment fostered an immense bureaucratic apparatus. The Administratum expanded until it became one of the largest institutions in human history. It recorded, categorized, and taxed every aspect of imperial life, from agricultural output to military requisitions and population control. Communication delays across interstellar distances meant that many decisions took decades or even centuries to implement. Yet, despite inefficiency and corruption, the bureaucracy sustained the Imperium by maintaining the flow of resources, troops, and information necessary for survival in a hostile galaxy. The Astartes chapters formed during the post-heresy restructuring became permanent fixtures of this new order. No longer vast independent armies, they now operated as elite shock forces under strict doctrinal regulation. Their independence was balanced by their small size and isolation. Each chapter developed its own monastic culture, traditions, and interpretation of duty, while remaining sworn to serve the Emperor without question. This structure preserved their military value while preventing any single chapter from wielding power comparable to that once held by the legions.
The emergence of the imperial cult further reinforced the cohesion of the modern Imperium. By presenting loyalty to the state as a sacred obligation and depicting the Emperor as a divine guardian, the cult provided a unifying belief system that transcended local cultures and planetary identities. Temples, rituals, and clergy spread across the stars, embedding reverence into every aspect of daily life. Faith became not only a spiritual practice, but a political instrument, ensuring that obedience to imperial law was perceived as an act of devotion. Yet the modern Imperium also inherited permanent instability. The traitor legions remained in exile, aligned with warp entities and hostile to Terra. External threats from Xenos civilizations persisted. Internal corruption, administrative decay, and regional fragmentation continually strained the system. The Imperium survived not through efficiency or harmony, but through sheer scale, ideological rigidity, and the tireless labor of trillions who believed that obedience was synonymous with survival. The memory of the Horus Heresy lay at the heart of this identity. Official doctrine portrayed the heresy as the ultimate warning, proof that unchecked ambition and ideological deviation could imperil all humanity. This narrative justified the harshness of imperial rule. Citizens were taught that uncompromising discipline and absolute loyalty were the only barriers preventing another collapse. As a result, the modern Imperium became a civilization defined not by aspiration toward progress, but by determination to avoid catastrophe. Despite its rigidity, the Imperium retained remarkable resilience.
Its decentralized complexity allowed local authorities to adapt to environmental and cultural conditions while remaining aligned with central doctrine. Its military forces, though stretched thin, defended an empire spanning millions of worlds. Its religious and administrative systems fostered a shared identity among populations separated by vast distances and immense cultural differences. The state endured through inertia, belief, and the constant reinforcement of duty. The birth of the modern Imperium therefore represents the final transformation wrought by the Horus Heresy. The hopeful, expansion-driven order of the Great Crusade was replaced by a fortress civilization, permanently on guard against betrayal and cosmic threat. Power became institutional, belief became mandatory, and unity was preserved through fear, devotion, and the memory of ruin. This new Imperium would endure for millennia, unchanging in its fundamental character, forever shaped by the wounds of the greatest civil war in human history.
In the centuries that followed the Horus Heresy, the events of the war gradually ceased to exist as simple historical record and instead became the foundation of a vast and intricate body of cultural memory. The Imperium, governed by institutions that required ideological cohesion to maintain control over countless worlds, understood that history possessed immense political power. The narrative of the heresy was therefore preserved, shaped, and sometimes simplified in order to reinforce loyalty and justify the structures of authority that emerged in its aftermath. What had once been lived experience evolved into a mythology that defined the moral universe of the Imperium. Official chronicles presented the conflict as a stark moral lesson. The Emperor appeared as the eternal guardian of humanity, betrayed by pride and ambition, embodied in Horus and the other traitor Primarchs. This narrative emphasized personal failure and corruption, while downplaying the complex political, ideological, and structural tensions that had contributed to the outbreak of war. The Imperium did not encourage reflection on systemic weakness. Instead, it framed the heresy as the tragic consequence of disobedience toward rightful authority. This interpretation justified the rigid discipline and doctrinal enforcement that now permeated imperial society. Religious institutions played a decisive role in this transformation of memory. Through ritual, liturgy, and sacred texts, they converted historical episodes into spiritual parables. The suffering of the emperor on the Golden Throne was depicted as a perpetual act of sacrifice undertaken to shield humanity from annihilation. Loyalist heroes became quasi-saintly figures, their deeds retold in sermons and recitations. The traitor legions were condemned as embodiments of heresy and corruption. Over time, this spiritual narrative eclipsed rational historical inquiry, transforming the heresy into a foundational myth that shaped belief and identity across the galaxy. Yet even as mythologization intensified, fragments of more nuanced understanding persisted within restricted archives, scholarly circles, and the memories of institutions that had directly participated in the war. Certain military orders preserved tactical and strategic analyses, recognizing that the heresy offered practical lessons in leadership, logistics, and psychological warfare. The Mechanicus maintained technical records of the machinery and innovations used during the conflict. However, access to such material was tightly controlled. The broader population encountered only the official moral narrative. This divergence between myth and restricted history had profound consequences. For most citizens, the heresy existed as a timeless moral drama rather than a complex series of events rooted in political and structural reality.
the lesson drawn from it was absolute. Deviation from imperial doctrine led inevitably to ruin. This belief supported the authority of the High Lords, the Inquisition, and the Ecclesiarchy, while discouraging any form of dissent or critical examination of governance. Memory became an instrument of control, ensuring that past catastrophe served to preserve present stability.
The Astartes chapters also constructed their own internal traditions of remembrance. Some honored the sacrifices of their loyalist forebears through strict codes of duty and penitential discipline. Others carried the weight of perceived failure, shaping their culture around relentless self-scrutiny or unyielding hatred of the traitors. Each chapter crafted a lineage of memory that reinforced its identity within the broader framework of the Imperium. In this way, the heresy continued to influence not only ideology, but also the psychology and operational ethos of the Emperor's elite warriors. Among the traitor legions, memory followed a different path. In Exile, they developed counter-narratives that justified rebellion as necessary or inevitable. Warp corruption twisted history into forms that reinforced hatred, pride, and alienation from the Imperium. Thus, the same events that unified imperial society through myth also sustained the identity of its eternal enemies. Memory became a battlefield as enduring as any physical front, shaping motivations and defining loyalties across millennia. The transformation of the Horus Heresy from lived catastrophe into foundational myth demonstrates the central role of narrative in the survival of the Imperium. History became doctrine, doctrine became faith. Through this process, the Imperium ensured that the trauma of civil war would never fade from collective consciousness. Instead, it would serve as a permanent warning, binding trillions of citizens to a system that promised order in exchange for unquestioning devotion. Yet this reliance on myth carried its own cost. By framing the heresy solely as moral failure, the Imperium limited its ability to reflect upon deeper causes. Structural weaknesses, political tensions, and the dangers of concentrated authority remained embedded within the system, largely unexamined. The lesson learned was obedience rather than introspection. Stability was preserved, but at the price of intellectual rigidity and institutional stagnation. Thus, the transformation of memory and myth stands as one of the most enduring legacies of the Horus Heresy. The war did not simply shape territory or governance, it reshaped the way the Imperium understood itself, its past, and its destiny. Through carefully cultivated remembrance, the heresy became both warning and justification, ensuring that its shadow would stretch across every subsequent age of human history. The long-term legacy of the Horus Heresy lies not only in the destruction it caused, but in the way it permanently reshaped the trajectory of human civilization. What began as a conflict between brothers expanded into a defining rupture that altered governance, ideology, military doctrine, and cultural identity across the Imperium. Every institution that emerged in the post-heresy era carried within it the memory of betrayal and the determination to prevent its recurrence. The heresy became the lens through which the Imperium understood both its past and its future. Politically, the heresy ended the age of visionary leadership. The Emperor no longer ruled directly. The Primarchs no longer functioned as trusted lieutenants of a single guiding will. Authority, instead,
fragmented into an intricate hierarchy of councils, offices, and religious institutions. This bureaucracy ensured continuity, but also entrenched rigidity. The Imperium ceased to evolve through deliberate design. It endured through inertia, bound by systems created to prevent any individual from gaining the power once held by Horus. The price of preventing another civil war was the loss of flexibility, innovation, and adaptability. Militarily, the heresy produced lasting transformation. The division of the legions into chapters created a decentralized elite force that could never again threaten the integrity of the state on the same scale. At the same time, the persistence of the traitor legions in exile guaranteed an unending state of conflict. War shifted from episodic campaigns to a permanent condition. Generations of soldiers lived and died under the assumption that peace was impossible. Strategic objectives focused not on expansion or reform, but on containment and survival. The Imperium became a fortress locked in perpetual struggle. Culturally and spiritually, the legacy of the heresy embedded reverence and fear at the core of imperial identity. The emperor's immobile existence upon the golden throne transformed him from ruler into object of devotion. Faith replaced rational doctrine as the primary mechanism of unity. This belief system provided cohesion across an empire of unimaginable scale, yet it also reinforced intolerance toward dissent. The tragedy of the heresy was used to justify absolute obedience. Citizens were taught that deviation, curiosity, or ideological independence could unleash chaos on a galactic scale. The heresy also ensured the permanence of internal suspicion. Trust, once the foundation of unity between emperor, Primarchs, and legions, was replaced by surveillance and doctrinal enforcement. New institutions arose whose sole purpose was to detect and eliminate signs of heresy. This constant vigilance preserved the Imperium, but deepened an atmosphere of anxiety and repression. The state became defined not by what it hoped to achieve, but by what it feared to lose. For the Astartes, the legacy was both honor and burden. They remained symbols of imperial protection, yet they also carried the memory of fratricide. Every chapter existed as a fragment of a broken whole. Every warrior trained in the knowledge that those most like himself had once turned against the Imperium. This awareness shaped their discipline, their isolation, and their relentless commitment to duty. Their loyalty became absolute not through trust, but through codified doctrine and ritualized identity. The traitor legions, in turn, embodied the enduring shadow of the heresy. Their continued existence ensured that the conflict never truly ended. Ideological opposition hardened into eternal enmity. Each new generation of imperial citizens inherited a world defined by a war that had begun long before their birth and showed no sign of conclusion. The heresy became not a closed chapter, but a permanent condition of existence. Ultimately, the long-term legacy of the Horus Heresy is a civilization frozen by the memory of its own near destruction. The Imperium survived, but it did so by transforming into a system that valued stability above all else. Progress gave way to preservation. Freedom gave way to control. Hope gave way to endurance. The scars of the heresy remained visible in every fortress monastery, every cathedral dedicated to the emperor, every bureaucratic edict, and every whispered warning against disloyalty. Yet within this rigid structure, one truth endured: the Imperium continued. Despite devastation, betrayal, and the collapse of unity, humanity retained a fragile hold upon the stars. That survival, purchased at immeasurable cost, stands as the final legacy of the Horus Heresy. It ensured that the Imperium would never again be what it once was, but also that it would never allow itself to fall without resistance. In this way, the greatest civil war in human history continued to shape the destiny of the galaxy long after the last battle ended, binding past, present, and future to the memory of the moment when loyalty shattered and the Imperium began to bleed.